Hey friends, it's Jimmy with my quick usual reminder to hit the like and subscribe buttons and the notification bell and turn on all notifications. Also, if you're feeling really helpful, leave a quick comment saying where you're listening from, or just drop a quick, I'm doing my part. Imagine a material that defies its own nature. For millennia, glass has symbolized clarity and fragility, a beauty waiting to shatter. Now, step back nearly 2,000 years to the volatile heart of the Roman Empire, specifically the reign of Emperor Tiberius. A legendary lost invention, known as vitrum flexile, or flexible glass, promised to overturn this fundamental reality. If this invention was real, it would have been a technological marvel that would have instantly destroyed the global market for everything from bronze cups to silver dinnerware. While this may not sound like a big deal, as you're about to see, the implications of this would have been incomprehensibly massive. By the 1st century AD, Roman glassmaking had already revolutionized daily life, particularly following the introduction of glass blowing. This innovation allowed for the mass production of high-quality glass objects, ranging from utilitarian oil vessels to ornate vases. Yet, all this glass was inherently brittle, ensuring constant market demand for replacement goods, supporting a robust and thriving industry. Flexible glass, conversely, would have been an economic weapon. The story of its creation and subsequent annihilation provides a chilling look at the conflict between radical genius and conservative state economics. The core narrative of this incredible invention comes to us primarily through two contrasting classical sources. The most vivid telling is preserved by the Roman writer Petronius, who described it as a Greek invention. Though the inventor remains frustratingly anonymous, he was a craftsman skillful enough to secure an audience with Tiberius. The inventor arrived, carrying a drinking bowl fashioned from his new material, ready to showcase his revolutionary creation. The dramatic demonstration provided by Petronius speaks volumes about the material's properties. After Tiberius examined the unique glass, the inventor dramatically hurled the cup onto the stone floor with all his might. The result wasn't the expected explosion of sharp shards, but a muffled thud. The bowl had merely been dented. To further prove his point, the craftsman calmly retrieved a small hammer from his toga and used it to tap the glass back into its original perfectly smooth shape. This demonstration suggests a material that was both shatter-resistant and highly malleable. Writing slightly later, Pliny the Elder, in his comprehensive Naturalis Historia, also recorded the story, but he expressed profound skepticism. He noted that it was a rumor that was more widely spread than well authenticated, indicating his skepticism about the invention. The climax of the story, as told by Petronius, reveals the economic anxieties of the Roman state. Confident in his success, the inventor stood before the emperor, likely expecting lavish rewards for gifting Rome a new, indestructible luxury good. Instead, Tiberius posed a fatal question. Did anyone else know the process? When the craftsman swore he was the only man alive who possessed the secret, Tiberius had him executed. Pliny's version offers a slightly less brutal outcome, suggesting the emperor merely ordered the entire workshop shut down. Regardless of the inventor's exact fate, the secret was intentionally and permanently suppressed. Tiberius's motives weren't born of petty cruelty, but of cold fiscal calculation. The emperor feared that flexible glass, a material that could be produced more cheaply and would last indefinitely, would devalue the price of commodities like bronze, silver, and gold. If this flexible glass could be mass-produced, the Roman economy would, in essence, be completely upended. If goods never wore out, demand for bronze, silver, and gold would collapse, destabilizing prices and elite wealth. By eliminating the inventor or shutting down his workshop, the state preserved economic churn, ensuring people kept buying, replacing, and spending. This was a critical concern, as Roman currency, particularly the silver denarius, was directly tied to the perceived intrinsic value of these precious metals. His financial policies aimed to maintain strict fiscal stability and preserve the purity of the coinage. Introducing a new material that threatened to replace the metals underpinning the currency system was seen as an existential threat that would trigger massive market destabilization. Of course, this understanding requires us to accept that Tiberius had a pretty strong grasp on the concept of supply and demand. Romans didn't have supply curves or demand curves, but they had an understanding of how abundance and scarcity impacted prices. By removing one of the main practical uses for precious metals, it's almost certain that Tiberius or his advisors would have understood the monetary implications of this. If the story is true, we have to consider what the inventor possibly made. Standard Roman glass was natron glass, consisting of silica, soda, and lime, materials that were robust but brittle. Modern scientific theories propose that the craftsman might have stumbled upon an early form of borosilicate glass, the shatterproof material used today in high durability items. If you're trying to picture what this looks like, imagine a glass oven dish or a durable glass measuring cup. This process would require incorporating boron trioxide, which could have been sourced from natural borax or boric acid deposits. But the materials themselves weren't the real issue here. Creating this glass also requires extremely high temperatures, exceeding 1,600 degrees Celsius. Notably, this process wouldn't be invented until 1884 by a German chemist using modern scientific and engineering techniques. Historians suggest that achieving and maintaining such extreme heat consistently in ancient furnaces presented a monumental technological challenge. This has led many to assume the invention must have been either a fluke of genius, a process impossible to consistently replicate, or that the story just simply wasn't true. If the tale is true, had Tiberius chosen innovation over preservation, Rome could have secured a unique trade advantage with its neighbors, at least for a time. Ultimately, though, when one looks at the tale rationally, it's easy to see why he feared this invention. While the initial fervor for flexible glass may have been immense, the only buy-it-for-life consumer goods at the time were made of precious metals. If this was replaced by a cheap glass product, this seemingly small invention may have crashed out the Roman economy. The art of manufacturing Tyrian purple stands as one of history's most fascinating chemical and economic puzzles. It was the ultimate visual manifestation of wealth, divinity, and absolute imperial power. Yet the story of this majestic hue, extracted from humble sea snails, begins not with glory, but with a powerful, almost unbearable stench. Imagine the city of Tyre in ancient Phoenicia, the coastal hub that gave the dye its definitive name. The industry was so foundational to the region's identity that the Greeks eventually labeled the territory Phoenicia, a designation translating directly to the land of the purple red. The dye's origin story was suitably legendary, linking its discovery to the Phoenician god Melkart. According to the story, while walking with the nymph Tyros, he watched his dog bite into a murex snail, staining its snout a brilliant, shocking purple. Despite this divine mythology, the reality of production was profoundly earthly, even repulsive. The industrial sites were notorious for their potent, enduring odor, which contemporaries likened to rotting garlic. This odor arose because the manufacturing process required the intentional decomposition of tens of thousands of mollusk glands. This contradiction, the production of the world's most sublime color through a foul, rotting process, provided a natural, effective barrier to entry for competitors. The powerful smell necessitated that the workshops be located outside city walls or positioned strategically downwind. This physical isolation was crucial in allowing the Phoenicians to maintain their trade secret, establishing a near-total global monopoly on the product. In fact, the only other people who would produce it in any quantity were the Carthaginians, who started out as a Phoenician colony specifically from Tyre. The costly secret of the purple lay within the glands of predatory sea snails belonging to the Muricidae family. The logistics involved in extracting this material were staggering, requiring meticulous, sustained labor on an industrial scale. Ancient producers estimated that to yield a mere single gram of the pure pigment required the processing of anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 mollusks. To put this in perspective, this was only enough material to slightly color the trim on a garment. This staggering production ratio meant the dye was astronomically expensive, rendering it literally worth more than its weight in gold. Archaeological evidence confirms that the Phoenician dye makers pushed local murex populations close to extinction in their relentless pursuit of the dye. This inherent scarcity and exorbitant price made Tyrian purple a strategic commodity, allowing the dye to function as a powerful, state-enforced class marker. During the height of the Roman Empire, the cost was staggering. 1 pound of purple dye cost roughly 150,000 denarii during Diocletian's reign. This was equivalent to approximately 3 pounds of gold, valued today at approximately $200,000. It is important to note that the most coveted shade of Tyrian purple wasn't the bright violet often imagined today, but rather a deep, iridescent, near-black maroon. Contemporary writers sometimes describe this as the color of dried blood on white clothing. The reason this was more coveted is that this deep dyeing process meant that more of the expensive snail dye had to be expended on a toga. It was a way to signal extreme wealth and very high social status in a way that any Roman citizen would instantly recognize. The Roman state codified this rarity through strict sumptuary laws designed to maintain clear distinctions between social classes. While senators were permitted a purple stripe on their toga, the wearing of a fully purple garment, known as the toga picta, was something much more special. It was initially reserved exclusively for triumphant generals, and later became the defining uniform of the emperor. Under rulers like Nero, unauthorized wearing of the color could be punishable by death. The ancient process, which constituted a sophisticated form of vat dyeing, involved several complex chemical steps. As described by Roman author Pliny the Elder, the freshly extracted glands were placed in lead vats containing brine and then subjected to slow heating over a period of approximately 10 days. Although Pliny's account was incomplete, it provided a framework for understanding the craft. Modern chemical analysis eventually confirmed the primary colorant is a molecule called 6,6-dibromo indigo. This molecule is structurally related to common blue plant indigo, but its unique dark reddish-purple hue are due to the presence of 2 bromine atoms. Crucially, the pigment does not initially exist in the mollusk. It's generated from precursors, specifically tyrandoxyl sulfate, which is held in the glandular fluid. When the gland is excised and processed, an enzyme called purpurase initiates a cascade of reactions, removing the sulfate group to produce tyrandoxyl. For the dye to successfully bond with fabric fibers like wool or linen, the insoluble colored pigment must first be chemically reduced to a colorless, soluble form known as the leuco compound. The ancient dyers achieved this reduction by unknowingly leveraging microbial action. They employed fermentation, likely within heated, briny vats, to create the necessary alkaline environment and reducing agents required to dissolve the colorant. The intense stench that defined the production sites was, in effect, a crucial process indicator. Once the fabric was submerged in the colorless Leuco solution, it was removed and exposed to air and sunlight. This exposure initiated the final critical step, oxidation. The Leuco compound immediately transformed back into the insoluble 6,6-dibromo indigo, permanently fixing the deep purple hue to the textile. This careful control over reduction and oxidation explained the dye's supreme quality. The permanence of Tyrian purple was unmatched, and unlike many plant-based dyes that faded, the dye strongly resisted washing out and actually intensified in color upon exposure to light. This made a toga with Tyrian purple on it an investment that potentially increased in value over time. For over a millennium, the Byzantine Empire became the sole and dominant customer for the purple producers. For those unaware, this was the continuation of the Roman Empire in the East, centered around the city of Constantinople. The imperial court tightly controlled and heavily subsidized the entire supply chain, restricting the finished material exclusively for coloring imperial silks. The concept of being born in the purple, being born to a sitting Eastern Roman emperor, cemented the dye's irreplaceable symbolic connection to the state. However, the economic structure supporting the art was inherently unstable. Due to the high production costs and staggering logistical requirements, the industry demanded massive, sustained state-level patronage. The demise of the industry was therefore not a failure of chemistry, but of logistics and finance. The first major blow to the process came when the Levant fell under Muslim rule in the 7th century, though the process continued onwards through trade for another 600 years. The system fully collapsed following the disastrous sacking of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade in 1204. This is an event that severely depleted and fragmented the empire's financial ability to sustain the infrastructure. The subsequent smaller successor states couldn't possibly muster the vast financial resources required to pay for the dyes. The production knowledge was essentially lost when its singular, centralized consumer went bankrupt. The Empire of Nicaea became Byzantium's lifeline after Constantinople fell in 1204. By 1261, this rump state retook Constantinople and restored the Byzantine Empire, which never again reached the level of stability to fund the production of Tyrian purple. Further, it's been speculated that during this period, the knowledge of producing this snail-based purple was lost, since there was only one major consumer of the product to begin with. Today, chemists can synthesize 6,6-dibromo indigo relatively easily and at a minimal cost. The synthetic molecule is identical to the natural pigment, with 1 gram costing less than $1. At present, some people do produce historically accurate Tyrian purple in extremely small quantities. The only catch is that if you want a kilogram of it to use for your dyeing projects, it'll run you approximately $3.5 million. The history of the founding of the city of Rome doesn't begin with a cornerstone laid by wise men or a treaty signed by equals. It starts with a shadow cast by a kindly wolf and ends in a pool of fraternal blood. It's a spectacular origin story that sets the stage for an empire founded on divine favor and absolute ruthlessness. This is the tale of Romulus and Remus and the Palatine Hill, where the world's most enduring political entity was supposedly born in 753 BC. The myth of the foundation, passed down through the ages by oral tradition and later written down by historians like Livy and Plutarch, was a deliberately constructed political tool. Its genius lies in how perfectly it overlaid a grand narrative of destiny onto the messy, complex reality of Iron Age village consolidation. A city destined to rule the Mediterranean couldn't settle for humble origins. The early Romans greatly admired the ancient Greek world, so they created a historical and cultural link to that heroic past through the figure of Aeneas. Aeneas was the Trojan warrior who escaped the destruction of Troy, sailed west, and settled in Italy. By tracing their line back to him, the Romans asserted a profound cultural legitimacy, claiming their place as successors to the greatest civilizations of antiquity. Importantly, the Trojans were a group that were wiped out as a political entity, likely allowing their cultural mantle to be adopted more easily than from another surviving group. This lineage was critical. The twins, Romulus and Remus, weren't immediate descendants of Aeneas. They were born centuries later to a woman named Rhea Silvia, who was a Vestal virgin and the daughter of a king in Alba Longa. To further bolster their claim to destiny, the twins were allegedly sired by the Roman god of war, Mars, who was crucially important in the early Republic. When the twins were infants, their usurping great-uncle, King Amulius, had them abandoned. Their survival in the wild, famously suckled by a she-wolf and later discovered and raised by the shepherd Faustulus, was interpreted as a sign of divine favor overriding human malice. The iconography of the she-wolf nursing the twins became, in fact, one of the most recognizable and widespread themes in Roman art. The twins grew up as ordinary herdsmen living a simple tribal lifestyle, but with an inherent knowledge that they were the main characters of the events that were going to unfold. As the boys grew, displaying remarkable bravery and strength, they eventually uncovered their royal heritage, overthrew Amulius, and restored their grandfather Numitor to power. With their royal lineage restored, Romulus and Remus decided to establish their own city near the spot where they were saved. They enjoyed widespread popular support because despite their royal lineage, they were also simple herdsmen themselves. Their immediate disagreement, however, was fundamental. Romulus favored the highly defensible Palatine Hill, while Remus preferred the nearby Aventine. Unable to resolve the conflict through debate, they agreed to seek divine approval through a contest of augury, watching the skies for auspicious birds. The augury itself was a point of contention that perfectly reflects the tension between nascent law and raw ambition. Remus claimed to have seen 6 birds first. Romulus countered that while Remus saw them first, he himself saw 12, a greater sign of divine favor. The resulting quarrel showed that even sacred rites were immediately subjected to political interpretation. Romulus declared victory on the basis of having seen more birds and proceeded to define the sacred boundary, known as the Pomerium. They began construction of his wall around the chosen Palatine Hill. This ritual act formalized the crucial transition from a collection of settlements to a defined city. The tragic climax of the myth arrived when Remus, showing contempt for Romulus's settlement and perhaps mocking the low, unfinished wall, defiantly leaped over it. This was a catastrophic violation of the Pomerium, the symbolic, sacred, and legal perimeter of the Roman state. Romulus reacted by cutting down his brother where he stood, establishing the ruthless principle that the state's security, law, and boundaries supersede all else, even kinship. This myth of fratricide functions as a powerful explanation for Rome's future strict legalism and militarism. It wasn't a tragic mistake baked into the founding narrative. It was the required sacrifice to sanctify the state's boundaries and centralize authority in the founder. The message is inherently clear. The Pomerium, the city itself, is more sacred than anything, even the family unit. This doctrine was necessary to justify the extreme civil control and military discipline that characterized the Republic and Empire long after the Roman kingdom fell. Romulus, having established his rule through this ultimate crime, went on to found Rome's institutions, government, military, and religious traditions, reigning as its first king. It's tempting to believe these tales were treated as historical fact by ancient people, but even the scholars who recorded them didn't. Roman historians themselves were acutely aware that they were narrating poetic tales. Livy, the monumental historian who preserved much of the foundation narrative, stated openly that he could neither affirm nor refute the legends surrounding the founding. He recognized that while there were likely grains of truth scattered throughout the tale, he didn't have the tools to find out what those were. The true geographical anchor of the myth is, without a doubt, the Palatine Hill. While the story of the twins is legendary, modern archaeological investigations of the Palatine offer crucial context and remarkable confirmation of the location's significance. Excavations prove continuous human occupation of the hill, dating back much further than 753 BC, possibly as early as the late 10th or 9th century BC. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of a small Iron Age hut village on the Surmalis peak of the Palatine, precisely the spot where tradition places the mythical founding. These were simple, primitive structures, oval or oblong in shape, built with wooden poles, beaten earth walls, and roofs of interwoven branches or thatch. The best preserved of these dates to the late 9th to 8th century BC. The specific location of these trenches and post holes, indicating the village's existence, aligns perfectly with ancient literary sources. The most compelling point of convergence between myth and material memory is the Casa Romuli, or Romulus's hut. This specific location was venerated throughout antiquity. Ancient accounts mention that the site was meticulously spared from later monumental construction, and the hut was continually restored to maintain its primitive form. This profound respect for the location proves that the Romans retained a powerful, accurate physical memory of the community's nucleus, even if the founder himself was fictional. The myth is, therefore, a sacred narrative built around a genuinely ancient, revered geographical location. The conventional mythical date of 753 BC, though fictional, isn't arbitrary. It falls squarely into the period of the Iron Age when the various hilltop settlements were demonstrably expanding and coalescing into a proto-urban center. The time around the mid-8th century BC represents not the founding of the first settlement, but likely the political unification of previously independent communities. Furthermore, the central conflict of the myth, the wall and the pomerium, is also validated by the ground. Archaeological traces, sometimes referred to as the Murus Romuli, suggest the existence of an early wall or defensive earthwork surrounding the Palatine summit. This confirms that the action that led to Remus's death was based on a real, necessary act of defense and demarcation undertaken by those early Iron Age communities. It may even be a cultural echo of a real event that happened at some point during the slow founding of the city. The tale of Romulus and Remus is a masterwork of narrative engineering, but despite this, there's more truth to the tale than educated ancients believed there was. It successfully condensed centuries of gradual growth, political conflict, and defensive consolidation into a singular narrative beginning in a specific year. While the specific tale of Romulus and Remus is a fiction, the archaeological evidence proves that it contains the kernel of the true story of the founding of Rome. In the end, it's a perfect illustration of how civilization isn't merely built on stones and bones, but on the powerful stories we choose to believe about ourselves. In the vast, dusty annals of human history, few figures have commanded the world's attention quite like Alexander III of Macedon. His life was a supernova of conquest that reshaped the geopolitical landscape of antiquity, fusing the Hellenic and Persian worlds into a new cultural epoch. Yet it is his death, and specifically the fate of his mortal remains, that has generated a mystery enduring for over 2 millennia. The disappearance of Alexander's body and tomb is a gripping narrative of political legitimacy and divine sanction to rule. To possess the body of Alexander was, in the fractured world of his contentious successors, a powerful symbol. Its location was once common knowledge, a landmark as defining as the Pharos Lighthouse or the Great Library. But today, it's a phantom lost to time, a source of endless speculation. Tutored by Aristotle and hardened by his father Philip II, he ascended the throne at 20 and spent the next 12 years marching east undefeated. He was a man who slept with a copy of the Iliad and a dagger under his pillow, viewing himself as a new Achilles. His personality was a volatile cocktail of paranoia, genius, and generosity, capable of massacring the population of Tyre one day and weeping over the body of a fallen enemy the next. By the time of his death in Babylon, in 323 BC, Alexander had begun to transcend mere kingship. Following his pilgrimage to the Oracle of Siwa in 332 BC, he had been hailed as the son of Ammon, a demigod walking among mortals. This belief in his own divinity fundamentally altered the political landscape. He was no longer just a Macedonian warlord, he was a deity sent to walk upon the earth. Consequently, his body wasn't just decaying biological matter, it was a divine totem with real-world power. The possession of this artifact became the first and most dangerous game played by the generals he left behind, a game that would tear his empire apart and launch the Hellenistic Age. Following Alexander's death in Babylon in June 323 BC, the Macedonian Empire instantly fractured. The king died without a clear heir, leaving his generals, the marshals of the Macedonian army, to carve up his conquests. In this vacuum of power, the corpse of the king became a talisman of immense political weight. Perdiccas, regent of the empire, sought to maintain the unity of Alexander's realm. His plan was to return the body to the ancestral burial ground of the Argead dynasty in Macedonia. By burying Alexander with his fathers, Perdiccas intended to cement the continuity of the royal line, over which he held sway. However, ancient tradition and the specific desires of Alexander complicated this plan. According to the historian Quintus Curtius Rufus, Alexander had explicitly requested to be interred not in Macedonia, but in the Siwa oasis in the Libyan desert, at the temple of Zeus Ammon. This request was born of his pilgrimage there, where the oracle had reportedly confirmed his divinity. Alexander viewed himself not merely as the son of Philip II, but as a demigod, and he wished to rest alongside his divine father in the Egyptian sands rather than the Macedonian soil. While the generals bickered, the body was prepared for a journey of unprecedented grandeur. It took 2 years to construct the funerary cart that would transport the king. The description provided by Diodorus Siculus, likely based on the eyewitness testimony of Hieronymus of Cardia, paints a picture of a vehicle designed to awe everyone. It was a mobile temple, a piece of propaganda on wheels that projected the infinite wealth and power of the deceased. The carriage featured a vaulted chamber approximately 12 by 18 feet in size, covered in scales of gold set with precious stones. This shimmering canopy was supported by Ionic columns, forming an open peristyle that allowed the golden sarcophagus inside to be visible to the awestruck crowds lining the road. 4 golden Nike statues stood at the corners, each carrying a trophy, while the base of the carriage was adorned with paintings depicting Alexander's military triumphs. To ensure the procession was heard before it was seen, a system of bells was suspended from the roof, designed to create a continuous, rhythmic tolling that added an auditory dimension. Drawn by 64 mules, each adorned with a gilded crown and bells, The entire contraption was designed to thunder across the landscape like a storm of gold. In late 321 BC, the procession finally departed Babylon, ostensibly heading west toward the Mediterranean coast to begin the journey to Macedonia. However, Ptolemy Soter, the governor of Egypt, had other plans. He understood that burying Alexander in Macedonia would strengthen Perdiccas. Burying him in Egypt, however, would legitimize Ptolemy's own separatist ambitions to establish an independent kingdom. Ptolemy colluded with Aridaeus, the general in charge of the funeral escort. As the procession reached Syria, near the border of Ptolemy's territory, the cart was hijacked. Instead of turning north toward Anatolia and Macedonia, it was diverted south toward Egypt. Perdiccas, stationed in Pisidia, was enraged. He launched an invasion of Egypt to reclaim the body and punish the insubordinate satrap, sparking the First War of the Successors. The invasion was a disaster. Perdiccas failed to cross the Nile, lost the support of his troops, and was assassinated by his own officers. Ptolemy had won. The body was his, and with it, the legitimacy of his own new dynasty. Ptolemy didn't immediately bring Alexander to the city that bore his name. Alexandria was still under construction, a vast building site of limestone and dust. Instead, Ptolemy interred the body in Memphis, the ancient capital of the pharaohs. This was a calculated move to associate Alexander with the traditional pharaonic lineage. It's highly probable that during this period Alexander's body was placed in the vacant sarcophagus of Nectanebo II, the last native pharaoh of Egypt. Nectanebo had fled Egypt in the face of a Persian invasion, leaving his prepared tomb empty. Utilizing this sarcophagus would have been a potent symbolic gesture, portraying Alexander as the legitimate successor to the pharaohs and the avenger who expelled the Persians. Sometime in the late 4th or early 3rd century BC, sources differ on whether it was under Ptolemy I or his son Ptolemy II. The body was transferred to Alexandria. Later, Ptolemy IV constructed a grand communal mausoleum for Alexander and the Ptolemaic ancestors. This structure was known as the Soma, Greek for body, and it was located in the royal quarter, likely at the intersection of the city's two main thoroughfares. The tomb became the spiritual center of the Ptolemaic dynastic cult, where Alexander was worshipped as a god. The original coffin was of hammered gold, fitted to the body like a mummy case. However, the immense wealth of the tomb made it a target even for its guardians. In 89 BC, Ptolemy X, facing a fiscal crisis and civil war, melted down the golden sarcophagus to pay his mercenaries. He then replaced it with a sarcophagus of glass or transparent alabaster. This desecration was viewed with horror by the populace and was seen as a harbinger of the dynasty's fall. With the fall of Cleopatra VII and the annexation of Egypt by Rome in 30 BC, the Soma became a site of pilgrimage for the new masters of the world. The Roman emperors, who sought to emulate Alexander's military genius, treated the tomb with a mix of reverence and appropriation. Julius Caesar paid his respects in 48 BC following his victory over Pompey. Here he famously lamented what a loser he was compared to Alexander, and how he felt like he hadn't really accomplished all that much. Decades later, in 30 BC, Augustus viewed the body and placed a golden crown and flowers upon it. The reverence turned weird under Caligula, who, according to Suetonius, ordered the armor taken from the tomb to wear for his own divine cosplay in Rome. In 200, Septimius Severus ordered the tomb sealed to the public and placed sacred books of magic within it to protect its secrets. The last recorded imperial visit came in 215 AD with Caracalla. Fancying himself Alexander Reborn, he removed his tunic, ring, and belt, placing them on the coffin as a tribute. Disturbingly, he would later massacre the Alexandrian populace in a fit of paranoia sparked by their mockery of his obsession. And with that massacre, Caracalla forever proved that he was a reasonable person and ruler. These visits confirmed that the tomb was intact and identified at least until the early 3rd century. After that, things were going to start to get quite murky. The disappearance of the tomb is not marked by a single recorded event, but rather by a fade into silence. By the end of the 4th century AD, the location was unknown. St. John Chrysostom, writing around 400 AD, posed the rhetorical question, asking where the tomb of Alexander was. This implies that by then, even the locals had lost the knowledge of its specific site. Between Caracalla's visit and Chrysostom's sermon writing, a convergence of 3 catastrophic forces provided significant instability: natural disaster, civil strife, and religious purging. On July 21st, 365, a massive earthquake, estimated at magnitude 8.0 or higher, struck off the coast of Crete. The resulting tsunami devastated the eastern Mediterranean. In Alexandria, the sea receded before returning as a wall of water that crashed over the royal quarter. Ships were stranded on rooftops, and the solid earth shook violently. This event likely caused significant subsidence in the harbor area, submerging parts of the royal quarter, or burying them under centuries of silt and debris. If nature began the destruction, religious zealotry finished it. In 391 AD, Emperor Theodosius issued decrees banning paganism. The Patriarch Theophilus led a mob to destroy the Serapeum, the massive temple of Serapis. Given that Alexander was worshipped as a god, it seems highly unlikely that the Soma would have been spared during this purge. In the vacuum of the tomb's disappearance, a compelling theory has emerged, championed by a physics professor turned Alexander enthusiast named Andrew Chugg. It posits that the body of Alexander wasn't destroyed, but was instead rebranded. The theory rests on a striking chronological coincidence. The tomb of Alexander disappears from the historical record at the exact same time that the tomb of St. Mark the Evangelist suddenly appears in Alexandria. St. Mark was martyred in Alexandria in the year 68, and tradition held that his body was burned. However, later church traditions claimed the body was miraculously saved. It's been argued that during the anti-pagan purges of Theodosius, the guardians of Alexander's corpse may have disguised the mummy as St. Mark to protect it. By labeling the God King as a Christian saint, they ensured his survival in a Christian empire. The narrative continues into the 9th century. In 828, 2 Venetian merchants, Buno of Malamocco and Rustico of Torcello, arrived in Alexandria. Seeking a powerful relic to elevate the status of Venice, they conspired to steal the body of St. Mark from its church. According to the Venetian Chronicle, they smuggled the corpse past Muslim customs officials by covering it in layers of pork and cabbage. According to tradition, the 2 Venetians told the devout guards that they were free to inspect their massive heaping pile of pork to their heart's content. The Muslim guards decided to skip out on a thorough inspection, and the corpse was removed from the city. The body was sailed to Venice and interred in the Basilica di San Marco, where it remains today. If Chugg's theory is correct, the millions of pilgrims who have venerated St. Mark are, in fact, bowing before Alexander the Great. The strongest physical evidence for this theory lies in a stone block embedded in the foundations of the basilica in Venice. Known as the Star Shield block, it features a relief carving of a Macedonian shield with a starburst emblem and a spear. Art historical analysis suggests the carving is undeniably Hellenistic Macedonian, dating to the 3rd century BC. Furthermore, measurements reveal that its dimensions perfectly match the missing outer casing of the Necta Nebo, the second sarcophagus, which is currently held in the British Museum. Personally, this is the theory that I want to be true, since it would be one of the most bizarre historical twists ever, but I can't present it uncritically. This theory, while obviously intriguing, requires more concrete archaeological evidence to be fully accepted by the scholarly community. Critics point out that the transmission of the Star Shield block from Egypt to Venice lacks thorough historical documentation. Further, some argue that the artistic motifs, though Macedonian, could have been transported independently of Alexander's remains. Historians have noted that for a large portion of its history, Venice controlled significant outposts in Greece. Another theory was proposed in 2024 by Egyptologist Christian de Vardavan. He suggests that Alexander's body may have been moved from Alexandria to the eastern desert of Egypt to protect it from destruction during the tumultuous periods of late antiquity. He notes that after the Muslim conquest of Egypt, there arose a tradition that Alexander was actually a particularly holy figure who was acting through the will of God. Under this theory, it's believed that these Alexander fans may have taken his body out to a site in the desert where it would be safe from religious zealotry. Notably, though, this argument is entirely circumstantial, though it is possible that future literary discoveries may shed further light on the theory. The most scientifically rigorous search currently underway is led by Calliope Limnaeos Papacosta in the Shalalat Gardens of Alexandria. This public park sits directly atop the ancient royal quarter. This location adheres to the standard historical consensus that the Soma was in the city center. Papacosta's team faces immense engineering challenges as the water table in Alexandria has risen significantly since antiquity, submerging the Ptolemaic strata. Using extensive pumping systems, she has uncovered massive foundation blocks of a public building extending over 200 feet, identified as part of the royal complex. They also discovered a marble statue of Alexander the Great, dating to the Hellenistic period. In 2018, discouraged and ready to quit, the discovery of a pristine white marble hand revitalized the project. Her working theory is that the tomb may have been buried or hidden deep within the royal quarter to protect it from later Christian or Muslim zealots. Under this theory, it resides in the bedrock layers currently threatened by groundwater. The search for Alexander isn't limited to the land. The topography of Alexandria has changed drastically due to subsidence and the tsunami in 365. This means a significant portion of the ancient royal quarter is now underwater in the eastern harbor. Notably, the entrance to a monumental mausoleum has been found in that area, proving that this was an area used for those purposes. This supports the hypothesis that the Soma, or parts of it, may have been claimed by the Mediterranean, scattered among the submerged ruins of the palaces. In the end, the remains of one of history's greatest figures, who molded the entire world around him, remains an unsolved mystery. Hey everyone, Jimmy here with a quick reminder to hit the notification bell and drop a comment if you haven't done so already. If you've spent any time online, you know that for a large portion of the population, the cat reigns supreme. It's a creature of memes, a furry companion sleeping on our keyboards, a domestic overlord demanding tribute in the form of treats. But this modern, pampered pet is the descendant of an animal that held a far more complex and paradoxical status in the ancient world. In the land of the pharaohs, the cat wasn't just a pet. It was a pest controller, a divine symbol, a cherished family member, and a legally protected citizen. In a strange and dark twist, the beloved feline was also a mass-produced commodity for the afterlife. The story of the cat in ancient Egypt is a journey from utilitarian hunter to holy icon, and it reveals the profound complexities of Egyptian society, religion, and commerce. It's a common belief that the Egyptians were the first to domesticate the cat, but the story actually begins elsewhere. The first steps toward the partnership between human and feline were taken not along the Nile, but in the Fertile Crescent of the Near East, around 10,000 years ago. As early humans transitioned from nomadic life to settled agriculture, they created a new kind of ecosystem. Their granaries, overflowing with the bounty of the harvest, became a paradise for rodents. This, in turn, attracted a stealthy, efficient predator, the local wildcat, known as Felis sylvestris libica. Unlike dogs, which were likely actively domesticated by humans, cats seem to have domesticated themselves. They were drawn to human settlements by the promise of an easy meal, and early farmers quickly recognized their value. These felines were a living, purring form of pest control, protecting the vital food stores that were the very foundation of civilization. A mutually beneficial alliance was formed. Humans offered scraps and a degree of safety, and in return, the cats kept the granaries clear of vermin. But they did more than just hunt mice. In a land where venomous snakes and scorpions were a constant household threat, the cat was also a formidable protector. Its practical value was immediately apparent in the agrarian society of the Nile Valley. Early artistic evidence confirms this role. A tomb fresco from the 21st century BC shows a cat confronting a rodent, a clear celebration of its pest control prowess. Because cats entered human society on their own terms, retaining their independence and mysterious nature, they were never seen as mere servants. They were powerful, autonomous allies, and this perception of agency would become the bedrock for their incredible ascent to divinity. The cat's journey from the granary to the temple was a gradual one, built upon admiration for its unique qualities. The Egyptians saw in the cat a creature of compelling duality. It was a fierce hunter, yet a gentle, nurturing mother. It was elegant and graceful, yet capable of sudden, lethal speed. These were characteristics they associated with the divine. It's crucial to understand that the Egyptians didn't worship the cats themselves. Rather, they saw these animals as living, breathing vessels that the gods could choose to inhabit, earthly manifestations of divine power. While early feline deities existed, such as Mafdet, a protector against snakes, the cat became most famously associated with the goddess Bastet. Originally, Bastet was a formidable and dangerous deity depicted with the head of a lioness, much like the warrior goddess Sekhmet. In fact, the two were often seen as two sides of the same divine coin. Sekhmet represented the sun's scorching, destructive fury, while Bastet represented its gentle, life-giving warmth. As the domestic cat became a more common and beloved presence in Egyptian homes, Bastet's iconography softened. Around the 2nd millennium BC, her image transformed from the fearsome lioness into the familiar, elegant figure of a woman with the head of a domestic cat. This religious shift perfectly mirrored the cat's physical integration into the household. Bastet became the goddess of the home, fertility, joy, and the protector of women and children. She was a deity who could be understood by observing the family pet. Amulets bearing her image were worn for protection, especially during childbirth, bringing the power of a great goddess into the most intimate moments of life. Her cult reached its zenith at her sacred city of Bubastis in the Nile Delta. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting in the 5th century, described her temple as a place of incredible beauty and the annual festival in her honor as the most joyous in all of Egypt. He wrote of barges packed with hundreds of thousands of pilgrims floating down the Nile, singing, dancing, and drinking wine in a massive, ecstatic celebration of this cat goddess. The cat's elevated status had profound real-world consequences, enshrined in both law and deeply held social custom. Throughout much of Egyptian history, the animal was protected by the state. Harming a cat was a serious crime, and slaying a cat even unintentionally would shorten your life significantly. The historian Diodorus Siculus, who visited Egypt in the 1st century BC, provided a stunning eyewitness account of this fervor. He described an incident where a Roman diplomat accidentally eliminated a cat. Despite the fact that Egypt was desperately trying to curry favor with the rising power of Rome, and even though the pharaoh himself sent officials to plead for the man's life, it was no use. An enraged mob gathered at the Roman's house, dragged him out, and eliminated him. This shocking event reveals that the reverence for cats wasn't just a doctrine of the priests, but a passionate grassroots belief that could even override political necessity. This devotion extended to the animal's death. Herodotus reported that when a family's pet cat died of natural causes, the entire household would enter a period of deep mourning. He even noted that they would shave off their eyebrows as a sign of their grief for their fallen cat. He also recounted the bizarre behavior of Egyptians during a house fire. He claimed they would neglect extinguishing the flames to form a human blockade to prevent a mother cat from going in to attempt to save her kittens in vain. Whether this is true, or just another one of Herodotus's stories, isn't known. The cat's sacred status was even weaponized, according to a later legend about the Battle of Pelusium in 525 BC. The story goes that the Persian king, Cambyses II, knowing of the Egyptians' devotion, had his soldiers carry cats and other sacred animals into battle. The Egyptian soldiers, horrified at the thought of harming the creatures, supposedly surrendered, choosing defeat over sacrilege. While likely an exaggeration, the tale underscores how deeply the cat's sanctity was ingrained in the Egyptian identity. Ancient historians could repeat this story, and others would accept that this level of extreme devotion to cats was a definite Egyptian cultural trait. For all the love and legal protection afforded to cats, their story has a deeply unsettling and contradictory chapter. The Egyptian belief in an eternal afterlife led to the widespread practice of mummification, and this included animals for several reasons. The most straightforward was the mummification of a beloved pet. Just as a pharaoh was buried with his treasures, a family might mummify their cat to ensure their cherished companion could join them in the next world. The discovery of a 2,000-year-old pet cemetery at the port of Berenice, where nearly 600 cats and dogs were buried with collars and other adornments, shows evidence of deep care. However, these lovingly prepared pets represent only a tiny fraction of the millions of cat mummies produced in ancient Egypt. The vast majority were part of a massive religious industry centered on votive offerings. Pilgrims flocking to temples, especially the great cult center of Bastet at Bubastis, would purchase a mummified cat to offer to the goddess as a physical prayer, a way to gain her favor. This incredible demand fueled a sprawling economy. Temples operated large-scale catteries, breeding cats not as pets, but as a crop to be harvested. Archaeological evidence from sites like Saqqara and Bubastis has uncovered vast catacombs containing staggering numbers of mummies. In the late 19th century, one such site yielded so many, an estimated 180,000, that they were shipped to England by the ton to be ground down into fertilizer of all things. And yeah, I'm just going to let that sink in for a second. Ancient mummified Egyptian cats were shipped to Victorian England as fertilizer. Scans of these cat mummies reveal a grim truth. Most were young cats, under 2 years old, that had been deliberately slain. This created a stark division. The illegal elimination of a cat in the street was a capital crime, but the ritualized sacrifice of a cat within a temple was a sacred act. The industry was so commercialized that archaeologists have even found fake cat mummies sold to pilgrims by unscrupulous con artists. Or perhaps I should say that these con artists were actually the good guys because their cat mummies were made of clay and wrapped into a cat form. The cat's exalted status persisted for thousands of years, enduring through changes in dynasty and even surviving the Greek Ptolemaic rule. The cult of Bastet was still immensely popular when Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. But the animal's divine protection could not withstand the monumental ideological shift that was coming. The rise of Christianity brought a new worldview, one that was fundamentally at odds with the Egyptian pantheon of animal-headed gods. Beginning in the 4th century, a series of decrees by Christian Roman emperors, most notably Theodosius I, sought to eradicate paganism across the empire. These laws prohibited sacrifices, forbade visits to temples, and eventually ordered their destruction or conversion into churches. The attack was on the entire religious structure that had supported the cat's sacred status. With the closure of the temples of Bastet, the great festivals ceased, the priesthood was disbanded, and the vast mummification industry collapsed. By the 5th century, the old gods had been officially silenced, and the cat's divine aura was stripped away by imperial decree. Close your eyes and picture walking up to a machine, sliding in a coin, and receiving a product. It's the most mundane of modern transactions. We do it for snacks, for sodas, for lottery tickets, and in some airports we even do it for iPads. It's a symbol of our automated, convenience-driven world. Now hold that thought and travel back in time. Not 50 years, not 100. Try 2000. You're in a temple in the city of Alexandria, the intellectual capital of the ancient Greco-Roman world. You approach a gleaming metal vessel, drop a coin into a slot, and a moment later, a precisely measured portion of holy water flows out for your ritual cleaning. This isn't science fiction, and it's not a historical fantasy. This device was real. It's the first known automatic vending machine, and we have the blueprints. Its existence, documented in the 1st century AD, throws a fascinating wrench into our neat linear ideas of technological progress. The machine's creator was no lone, forgotten genius. He was hero of Alexandria, the Leonardo da Vinci of his time. Pinning down his exact dates is tricky, as almost nothing is known of his personal life. But scholars, citing his work's reference to a lunar eclipse, have confidently placed his most active period in the mid-1st century AD, flourishing in Roman Egypt. Hero was a premier mathematician, physicist, and engineer. He was a professor at the legendary Museum of Alexandria, the research institution that housed the Great Library. He was, in essence, a top-tier academic at the ancient world's most advanced research university. To use slightly anachronistic language, we know him as the greatest experimentalist of antiquity. His surviving works, many preserved only through Arabic translations after the library's destruction, show an astonishing range. His Metrica was a vital compendium of geometric formulas for calculating areas and volumes, including the formula for a triangle that now bears his name. His Dioptra was a treatise on land surveying that described a sophisticated tool for the task and used to bolster governmental efficiency. But his most famous works, Pneumatica and Automata, were catalogs of wonder devices. They were instruction manuals for building devices powered by steam, air, and water pressure. In these pages, alongside the first steam engine, we find the humble holy water dispenser. We know precisely how the vending machine functioned because Hero himself wrote the manual. The design, described in Pneumatica, is a masterpiece of simple, effective mechanics. A worshipper would approach what Hero called a sacrificial vessel. They would insert a coin, His text specified a 5 drachma coin into a small slot at the top. This is where the magic happens. Inside the locked box, the coin fell onto a small pan or tray. This pan was attached to one end of a balanced lever, like a tiny, perfectly weighted seesaw. The weight of the coin would tip the pan side down. This, in turn, pulled the other end of the lever up. This end was attached by a string or rod to a small, cone-shaped plug. This plug sat snugly in a pipe, sealing a large reservoir of holy water above it. When the coin tipped the lever, the plug was lifted, opening the valve. A stream of holy water flowed out for the worshiper. But the true genius of the device was its self-regulation. The lever didn't just stay open. As it tilted, the pan lowered until it was at such an angle that the coin slid off. The moment the weight was gone, a counterweight snapped the lever back into its starting position. The plug reseated, the valve closed, and the flow of water stopped. The machine was instantly reset, ready for the next coin. This brings us to the why. Scholars have two main theories, and the truth likely lies in a brilliant synthesis of both. The first theory is purely practical. It was a problem-solving device. The temple priests had a cash control problem. Worshippers were either taking too much from the open basins, or simply not paying at all. Hero's invention solved this beautifully. It automated the role of a priest, ensuring that every single worshipper received their equal portion. More importantly for those funding the endeavor, the temple got its 5 drachmas for every portion dispensed. It was a loss prevention and portion control tool. This practical theory gets much more interesting when we look at Hero's other known inventions, because they were all similarly completely out of time and place. The other theory is that it was designed to instill religious fervor in people who witnessed it. This was a man who designed automatic temple doors that magically opened when a priest lit a fire on the altar. He designed statues that would quote-unquote miraculously pour wine and milk on command. He even designed a fully programmable 10-minute-long mechanical puppet play. But perhaps most shockingly of all, he designed a functional steam engine called the Aeolipoli, a device that was named after a Greco-Roman god of air. His own writings openly admit that these devices were used in temples and were to instill faith in the gods through supposedly magical means. This was a culture obsessed with objects of awe and wonder. In this context, the vending machine was a small personal miracle. For the average worshiper, putting a coin in a box and watching a divine liquid pour out, commanded by their offering, would be a powerful testament to the temple's gods. Here, the two theories merge. The machine was the perfect tool of social and religious control. It solved the priests' practical economic problem while simultaneously reinforcing their ideological power by creating an awe-inspiring miracle for worshippers. This in turn brought more people in because their faith had been bolstered by the apparently miraculous dispensing of the water. With that, though, we come to the biggest question. If Hero's first-century world had a coin-operated vending machine and a working steam engine and other wonders, why did the Industrial Revolution wait another 1,700 years? Why wasn't the Roman Empire full of snack machines and steam-powered factories? For decades, the dominant theory, most famously argued by historian Moses Finley, was slavery. Finley's thesis was that the Roman Empire was a slave society, where cheap, ubiquitous human labor was so fundamental to all economically productive processes. It created no economic incentive to invest in labor-saving technology, since the expanding empire was constantly funneling slaves into every major population center. In essence, it made more economic sense for a Roman citizen to buy a human being than it did to build a machine. This, Finley argued, created the conditions for technological stagnation that wouldn't be broken by such a society. While this theory is powerful, modern scholars have largely proven it's too simple, or perhaps more accurately, too broad. In recent decades, Finley's thesis has been shown to be somewhat incorrect in a number of ways, and I'll get to that in a moment. We now recognize that Rome was, in fact, a much more technologically interested society than previously acknowledged. A second, more compelling theory is one of cultural mindset. Heroes' inventions, including the steam engine, weren't seen as tools for production, they were toys for entertainment. They were wonders to enthrall the masses. The steam engine was regarded almost as a mystical device and wasn't used to perform any practical purpose. Heroes' automatic theater was just that, a theater for puppets. The entire goal of this class of technology was for entertainment or religious purposes. It was intended to put on a good show and maybe teach a lesson, not to increase productivity. The engineering elite was focused on building experiences for the wealthy, not on automating labor for them. This brings me back to the previous point. The Romans did care about all sorts of technology. However, their technological fascination generally didn't overlap with areas slave labor could cover. The third theory, that they simply couldn't build these machines at scale, is the weakest. Some argue the devices were too complex and expensive, and that the steam engine, for instance, was just a novelty that couldn't actually do any useful work. But this argument crumbles against the facts. The Roman Empire was a master of mass production. Archaeological evidence shows the mass production of tablewares, glass, nails, iron tools, and textiles in massive quantities. For instance, the Romans had massive manufactories that were capable of producing standardized pottery in amounts that wouldn't be seen again for thousands of years. And the 2nd century BC Antikythera mechanism, an astronomical computer, proves they had the skill for mind-bogglingly precise metal gearing. The truth, then, isn't that one of these theories is right. It's that the industrial spark failed because all three factors were misaligned. The Romans had the technical skill for mass production, but they lacked the cultural mindset and the economic incentive to apply that skill to automation. They mass-produced pots, not vending machines, because there was a mass market for pots. A vending machine, on the other hand, was a high-craft, high-cost novelty for a single specific purpose. A steam engine, on the other hand, could have sparked a massive increase in productivity, but the constant flow of captives made the initial investment simply not worth it. Human beings, after all, have trouble understanding nonlinear growth patterns. Hero was, in essence, an ancient Greco-Roman Da Vinci, a mind centuries ahead of his world. He blended mathematics, engineering, and showmanship into creations that pushed the limits of imagination. His machines were visionary, hinting at a future his own civilization never realized.